Okay, I guess we're good to go. It's 6 o'clock. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody in attendance for our first official meeting of 2025, as hard as it is to say that and believe. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. It's good to see a good turnout for our first meeting, even though it's a committee of the whole meeting and not a regular meeting. It's a little different content, but thank you. I'd like to start by saying this meeting takes place in the traditional and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. There are no additions, deletions to the agenda. So number 4.1, committee of the whole agenda. Is someone prepared to move the agenda? Moved by Councillor Strong, seconded by Councillor Greek. Was that who headed up? Okay. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried. Approval of the minutes. There aren't any. Presentations, there aren't any. So the first item on the agenda is 7.1, business arising and unfinished business. It is the Lunenburg Daycare Center. And before we get to the recommendation or discussion, I will hand it over to Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Myra. Thanks for the opportunity to introduce and present this report related to the Lunenburg Daycare Center's request for town-owned land. We've included a memo in the agenda package, including a recommendation that the Committee of the Whole provide direction to staff on the daycare center's request for town-owned land, including preferred site options and any key considerations, and direct staff to incorporate the related info resulting from this direction into a detailed report and present the report to council for decision at next week's January 14th regular council meeting. There's a draft motion provided for consideration in the memo to that effect. To provide some background information on the discussions between the town of Lunenburg and the Lunenburg Daycare Center, which were initiated this past May and have been ongoing regarding the provision of town-owned lands for the purpose of constructing a new and expanded daycare facility. At this point, the Lunenburg Daycare Center requires confirmation of support, whether through a confirmation of ownership or leasehold or a partnership agreement or commitment for this land from the town to be able to meet the requirements of their provincial funder. Their deadline is January 15th so that they can secure further funding and proceed with project planning. Given that the deadline is next week, this means that this item would have to be referred to the January 14th regular council meeting for decision. At the December 10th council meeting, the Lunenburg Daycare Center delivered a presentation that included a proposal of 3 choice building site options located within the town's recreation complex area. The options presented included the existing community center site, 87 Victoria Road, which is otherwise known as the Blue Building, and the field parking lot area sort of wedged between those 2 sites. Although these 3 options were the options proposed in detail during the public presentation, the daycare center has previously expressed that they would be willing to work with the town on any potential site options. While early discussions explored a mixed-use facility with a daycare and gymnasium, the gymnasium was deemed unfeasible due to high costs. However, the daycare center has expressed interest in collaborating with the town on future planning and administrative models for the existing community center if the new daycare is constructed at the recreation complex. Such an agreement would require further negotiations and could potentially provide mutual operational and financial benefits. To briefly describe general site location areas, the recreation complex area to start. In early discussions, the recreation complex area emerged as a preferred site option. The general area is already serviced with water, wastewater, electricity, and ample parking. The levels of complexity and cost for servicing a new structure vary depending on the specific location within the area and would require further study, which may provide significant efficiencies, that is in the recreation complex area, that could benefit project timelines and reduce construction costs as compared with other areas of town. And additionally, this area would provide a campus-like setting for the daycare center with proximity to recreation and educational facilities, and as a result, many potential synergistic opportunities. Other potential areas of town, briefly, town staff have conducted a preliminary review of other town-owned sites, and the review indicates that these alternatives are unlikely to match the recreation complex in terms of convenience or accessibility to complementary facilities. And additionally, they would require significantly greater investment in servicing infrastructure. However, these sites might also offer opportunities to not negatively impact existing recreation servicing. Within the memo, I've also included a series of the various sites of town-owned land that we have reviewed, including some potential benefits and challenges associated with them. I won't go into too much detail about those at this point in time because of the earliness, I guess, of the potential arrangement. A lot of it is qualitative in nature. However, to briefly touch on the financial impacts, divesting land certainly has a financial impact. The town would be relinquishing ownership of a municipal asset, which could limit future opportunities for development, revenue generation, or other strategic uses of the land. And once divested, the land would no longer be available for alternate municipal projects or initiatives. That said, all the sites are not shovel ready, and some would require significant investments in servicing upgrades. For example, 87 Victoria Road, otherwise known as the Blue Building, would necessitate a new storage building, which would likely cost several $100,000 as a preliminary estimate. Or divesting of the community center would save the town approximately $110,000 a year in operating costs, including future capital expenses. And depending on the terms of the divestment, there may still be financial obligations related to the site, such as shared infrastructure maintenance or adjacent property impacts. However, there are costs currently associated with the recreation complex. So just to reiterate, again, the failure to meet the January 15th deadline for the daycare center's request, it could delay or jeopardize the project. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. So now this discussion is open to council. So does anyone have any questions first they'd like to ask Mark? Now would be the time to fire away.
Fire away, turn on the red light. I'm Councillor Strawn for the members sitting in the gallery tonight. I just want to say that this project meets a sniff test for me for use of public lands. I am a strong advocate of daycare. I sat on the provincial roundtable in the 1990s through until I retired in 2011 from that part of my commitment. And I appreciate the frustration, but I also appreciate the pressure that this new council is under to find and approve of something. So I have a few questions. On page, unfortunately, these aren't numbered, but on page 2 of the memo, we have the statistics. And I'm just wondering if there's drawn from Statistics Canada or is there an independent source? That's the first paragraph.
Yeah, so these statistics were actually lifted from the daycare centers report themselves.
Okay. And I also am a huge fan of Access by Design 2030, so I appreciate that would be part of this whole deal. Is the parking report that we had commissioned or the former council had commissioned, is it available yet for that area of off of Victoria or the community center?
We've just received a draft report,
Okay.
which is currently under review right now. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So I can't accept anything about parking at this point until I've seen that report, because I know that we did do a lot of focusing on the community center parking area.
Yeah, there was certainly
Okay.
some work done on that.
I also wanted to challenge the potential challenge of the existing community center, that a retrofit would be financially unfeasible. And I'm assuming you know about net zero, and everybody in here knows about net zero and the savings of using an existing building to build. That's just my point there. So I guess this is also a big one with me, because when I went door to door, I did hear a lot about the flood zones and the climate report that we had commissioned in 2015, the action plan. And in section, on page 18 of that plan, CBCL says, actually at page 23, CBCL says it recommends that planning not place any facilities on land in that area. And I'm assuming we've done some homework on that to see whether that's changed or.
I mean, in the current context, I think, I mean, it is, I mean, that report is 10 years old, but we've sort of looked at it from a planning and, you know, in conversations with Tyson too, with that from a public works perspective. Despite that, I don't think that it necessarily, despite that recommendation, I don't think it necessarily, I think it does warrant conversation of whether it's viable regardless in that situation, because there are, I mean, there are methods to mitigate building on in flood zone sites
fair enough.
like that.
Probably speaking so that if anybody's not here or anybody's here that has asked me that question, that they know that it's active in my mind and it's active in our mind too, as a council. And then the comparison is a Bridgewater Daycare Center, Small World Learning Center. Is that not a for-profit, or is it a not-for-profit?
I believe that's not-for-profit as well.
Okay. And I spent a few minutes today looking at the provincial list of daycares throughout the province, and I did not find any facility of this size. So that I'm just trying to justify how a little town or a little community like Lunenburg comes up with a 250-seat facility when Halifax's probably biggest one is 125. But that's just something to consider if we, depending on what we do with the recommendations. Will the failure to meet the January 25th or 15th deadline actually delay, or it could delay? What am I hearing there?
My understanding is that it will delay.
Okay.
Yeah. It could potentially impact it would impact the viability of the project, basically, from the funder.
And then I've seen all of the identified lands, but I'm just curious. So this actually came up, a question to me in the community. Is there any other land near the Harborview Haven project? Because that's close to the community center too, in terms of accessing schools and recreation facilities. Closer than some of the other locations. And that's it.
Thank you. I guess on the land up by the daycare, or up by Harborview Haven, I should say, the new Harborview Haven rebuild, I did ask the question today in our meeting, Deputy Mayor, and CAO meeting, and there is a response to that, and I'll ask the CAO to speak if you'd like on behalf of that.
Sure. So as we know, the town has committed to using that site for Harborview Haven. That project, that land transfer has not been completed yet. And at different stages of that project, Harborview Haven has itself asked for additional land. So there may be synergies between those two projects, but it's very difficult to say at this time. That would largely, I think, be a conversation between the daycare and Harborview Haven. The other issue, of course, is that that land is not serviced. It also currently has no road connection. So building on that site, it would be very difficult for the daycare to meet their provincially mandated target for the completion of this project. I'm not saying that that rules out the site, just something for you to keep in mind. Again, there are some significant servicing issues there as well. But again, to provincially funded projects, there might be room for synergy. But again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because again, it could cause problems for the Harborview Haven project moving forward. And that is something that council has already committed to. So to jeopardize one project on behalf of another could pose risks.
I just have to say that I regret the termination or the terminology of could or should. I would really like to be able to say it will at this point or it won't. And I guess that adds to my frustration and probably the frustration on the part of the daycare in getting this all completed in this short timeline. But considering that the largest employers are within walking distance of the new project of Harborview Haven, I think it's really worth thinking about.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions at this time? Deputy Mayor?
Sure. I've got a list, but I guess I'm concerned about some of the options, or I have concerns about some of the options that are open to discussion at the moment. But as Councillor Strong mentioned, I'm very supportive of this whole project, and I see the huge benefit of new and improved and enlarged daycare in our community because of all of the value that brings. So I guess I'm wondering about in some of these options that were presented originally, or that are before us now in this report, there seems to be a weighting that needs to be done between the benefits of a new daycare and the services to the community with the facilities that are there, with the community center property, and the value that brings to the community. You know, notwithstanding the staff pointing out that there's some savings if that facility is you know, no longer available as a community center. But you know, I think that you know, with the changes of use, that represents a loss to the community that I don't, you know, I think that in my mind at this point that would take that site out of the running as an option. And I do think that, you know, with the province in partnership here, that's kind of part of a bigger discussion about value to the community for recreation and other important services that we might have. With the Blue Building site and also share the concern Councillor Strong raised again about, you know, floodplain, and we've talked about that a little bit previously. It's a wide area of town-owned property is impacted by that risk. So I think any project that's being considered for that area, we have to take that into consideration, and mitigation has to be taken in some way, shape, or form. And I don't know what that looks like. And I'm sure the daycare team would be keen to ensure that their investment in their property would be protected somehow from the risk. But it is there. And so I think we need to be mindful of that. But I threw you, Your Worship, a question to our engineer, because the Blue Building site has great potential as a site in my mind for the daycare center, but similar to the loss with the asset to the community of the loss of a community center is the loss of a building that's used by our public works very extensively. And so I don't think we can minimize that impact on our operations, really. Storage is one thing, but it's also a carpentry shop And I wonder if there's been time or if you've had consideration given to what would happen in that instance. Is there, and we've mentioned that, we'd have to put the stuff somewhere. So, some sort of storage shed could be erected or whatever. But if you're talking about a building that, houses folks for, work, the carpentry shop, we're not just talking about a storage shed, so we'd have to maybe relocate that elsewhere. But is there a scenario that you could provide or that you would say is a possibility if that site were repurposed for the daycare? Is that too much of a loaded question?
So through the chair, yeah, there's no doubt that that the left, if I'm looking from Victoria, the left side of that building's used for storage. Things like plows get put in there during the winter, all our large pipe. Garbage bins, that kind of stuff, the 3 sets that come out during events, all kinds of stuff. Rec users as well for storage of their items too, and it's good proximity to the rink for them. At the moment, the carpentry shop is being used. We're bringing in the wooden picnic tables and benches and fixing up those that need replenishing during this time of the year where they're not really used, and trying to get them back into service. So I think if we're looking at the options for relocating the blue building, we're kind of back to the same list that we're looking at for the daycare for a lot of it, right? Like, it's not something that could easily be transposed to the armory site or anything like that. So we're kind of in a similar scenario to my way of thinking.
So similar scenario as in timeline, or I'm not quite sure if I know what you mean.
So through the chair, in terms of available sites for that relocation of a similar facility, and it would, like as Mark outlined, not too many of those sites are shovel ready, and we don't have a plan in place to pick that up tomorrow if we needed to. So there would be a delay in considering the feasibility and then going through that process.
Anybody else have any questions? Councillor Babineau?
I was just wondering, I'm not sure if it would be Mark or Tyson, but of the 3 design options, which one would have the most significant risk as far as the floodplain goes?
So through the chair, I mean, we've kind of touched on it with Councillor Strawn's comments, that rec area, the Victoria Road area, I think most of us understand that if there's a flood, that's a high risk area. The land use bylaw is kind of what we use to guide the daycare with. When these comments started up, there's a flood risk map area that's included in that document. So that's from 2021. That bylaw came into effect. It identifies that swampy area, and then the entrance off Victoria Road to that parking lot's kind of either side of it there. So I think anything in those lower lying areas would sort of be pretty easily identified as a risk. The land use bylaw does specify sort of a minimum base elevation for building in those flood risk areas. And again, we shared that recommendation with the daycare in terms of mitigating that risk.
Any other comments, questions? Councillor Daphne?
So I'm just gonna put it out here. The first 3 options that were given, totally against all 3 of those. The blue building causes concern for me because of the floodplain. We can't predict what Mother Nature is going to do. We can try to maybe guess, but in the end, Mother Nature is going to win. And I'm very cautious about the blue building. I'm also cautious about the blue building too, because that is already a heavy trafficked area. And if we're going to add construction to that area, how is that going to affect Stelia, the Independent, Tim Hortons, the ambulance base, and that sort of thing? So that's my reasons that I'm kind of leaning away from the blue building. I did have a couple residents reach out to me, and their concerns were traffic and adding kids to the mix. They see potential there for an accident, a tragedy. However, I also know that we need a daycare. And I wish I could snap my fingers and make this happen right away. But I also think tonight that all of us around this table need to have a very, very good discussion so that we can leave this meeting having a better idea where we are going with this. We have parents depending on us. We have staff, daycare staff depending on us. And I don't feel that we can prolong this anymore.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Greek.
More of a comment really than anything, I agree with all of my colleagues here that, I think it is of utmost importance that we do find a solution to this and find a way to ensure that the daycare stays in Lunenburg. However, as many of us have summed up already, it's something that there's really not a perfect scenario out there right now. One thing that came to my mind additionally with the blue building is, as Tyson mentioned earlier, if we have to pick from one of the sites that we're looking at in terms of the daycare already to replace the blue building, should we go with that option? That's another, site for potential development that is taken off the board down the line in terms of any future needs. And I think that's something also to consider as well. That would be two potential sites in the current blue building, and another potential site that would be taken up and be used for future uses. So certainly none of us can guess what's coming down the line, but if we could have good plots of land suddenly drop from the sky, I think we would all invite it. But unfortunately, that isn't the case, and I think we have to be cognizant of the land that we have available and the good land for future potential development that we have at our disposal.
Thank you. Anybody else? And Deputy Mayor?
I would just wonder too about the and I wonder if the my council would agree to some input from the daycare folks. I see we have representatives here, and if there are questions that they can best answer, if we could allow them an opportunity to answer them, but
I'd be fine with that. The majority of my colleagues are. So if you guys would like to say anything, you're more than welcome. The mic is there, or you can just take questions or try to answer them if you're okay with that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I sort of have done that.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Mackenzie Fraser and I'm representing the Lunenburg Daycare. Before questioning, just one question that came up from Allison Stratton was if the daycare is possibly the new facility too big for Lunenburg. And I just want to point out that it's not just servicing the town of Lunenburg. Mahone Bay doesn't have a daycare. So that's servicing that town. All the employees that travel to town every day, it's servicing those people. As far as New Germany, kids are coming, Western Shore. So it's servicing a large area. And it's also the way the licensing works, not just under school age children, but also after school programs and summer programs that counts within that number. And within our report, those numbers come from the municipal housing needs report. That's where those numbers come from. And the wait list is, what is it? 226 in that. So even if we build magically the facility we hope to tomorrow, there would still not be enough room. There would still be a wait list.
What in the past, has the wait list ever been close to this number before, or is this new?
It's very new. So part of that is the young families moving here, the kind of like mass migration during COVID. And then also right around that time, the government introduced the $10 a day daycare. So it never actually got down to that amount. They're still working towards it, but that decreased from $36 a day down to $14 a day really made it more accessible for families, and more families were trying to, that wasn't an option for them now. They could afford it.
I appreciate all of that. And like I said, you're not going to find an anti-advocate in me. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. I know in the past with other daycares, there's been long waiting lists in the city of Halifax, for example. When my children were born, I was on 5 different waiting lists, scared to death that I wouldn't get in one of them. And then when the reality came along, you just took one of those spots. But there's no plan for daycare in any of the other communities? It's all falling on Lunenburg?
Bridgewater, Small World is working on increasing their spaces as well. But other than that, none within the South Shore. It would just be the one in Bridgewater.
What is the ratio now in the regulations of caregivers to children?
It depends on the age group. Nicole, the director, would be able to answer that better than me.
So for infants, it's 1 to 4, and we have 10 babies in our center right now. So we have 3 staff in there. For all the toddler rooms, it is 1 to 6. And there's 12 in each one of those classrooms. And then our preschool rooms are 1 to 8, and we have 2 of those, and then a school age program, which is 1 to 15. And there's 30 children plus in that class.
So that goes into my next question, which was about parking. I'm not clear from the report
parking
of
is
how many
terrible.
parking spots would be needed for staff.
So our staff park in our back parking lot right now, and also the parking that was allotted for SO and the physio right there. We had also asked before about if we could park at the back end of the fire department, and we haven't had to use that at all. So
So how many new staff, like how many staff total will be in the building that you would need parking? Like how many new spaces?
if the new building were to go, we would have, we currently have 23 staff at this daycare, and we would probably be adding up to 10 to 15 more.
That's what I was thinking in my head, but I needed to hear it.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, Mackenzie, thanks. I know that there's the preferred site is with the community center complex, and yeah, did you want to speak to that?
At this point, we've been working with the town since May of 2024, and we're just a serviceable site that is, you know, a workable site, is all we're, and walkable, but it doesn't need to be there.
Okay, so open, I guess, yeah. Obviously, ideal because of proximity to all the other things, and I get that. So, yeah, I think it's there's just so many layers to get through. Looking at the other options, then, I mean, we're moving down Star Street too. And in there, it seems partly it's servicing, right? There's not a slam dunk with what's there now. There need to be better improvements to the infrastructure for electrical, wastewater. Am I right? I'm looking at staff.
Through the chair. So if I'm at Lincoln Street looking down Star Street towards the wastewater treatment plant, the left side of the road is challenging because of the existence of the force main there, which kind of cuts off direct access to the sewer main running down Star Street to take wastewater to the plant. So there's instances where existing property owners on that side of Star Street have to pump back to Lincoln Street for it to enter the system there to get around that. So yes, that's a challenge. On the other side, there's fairly extensive. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert in the electrical utility, but my awareness is that there's considerable overhead electrical coming around the corner, because we had to look at that when we were looking at the upgrades for the wastewater treatment plant. And then they run up Star, back sort of in the tree line there. And there's some considerable grade on that side going up to the back of Hillcrest Cemetery there. So servicing perhaps is more available in terms of water and sewer on that side, but there would be grading challenges with dealing with the topography there, which would either require sloping or retaining walls or potentially those things to combat that. Again, not trying to, they're just the things that come to my mind very quickly that would present challenges on that side. And then the servicing doesn't run past the wastewater treatment plant on Star Street going towards Kissing Bridge. So that would mean service extensions if we were looking at sort of further in that direction. And then that sort of brings the back harbour into play on one side there, the same side as the plant, and that's kind of a swampy wetland area. And the Hillcrest side also has considerable drainage coming down that hill as well, surface drainage. And again, but there's potential to overcome that, but I wouldn't expect it to be simple to overcome.
Yeah, so no golden opportunities as we've been seeing. I would like us to try to delve deeper into what might be the best of the not great options that we have in front of us, so that we can, have a fulsome, to try to get rid of some of the coulds and mights and whatever in this current report. A week is a tall order to get some of that information, but maybe we can attempt that. That would be my hope. But I'll open it to others for comment first.
I'll add my 2 cents worth now, I guess, if everybody else is done at this point. And I guess much like the deputy mayor, we don't have a perfect solution, unfortunately. But in my opinion, reading the report extensively multiple times on Sunday, thinking I missed something, hoping I missed something, I personally feel that the area we should be focusing on, trying to come up with a solution and making this a better project for the community at large, is the blue building. I think this is an opportunity for us to go back to the province and say, this is the location we feel best suits our needs. We need help because we have to relocate a big part of our public works department is located in the blue building, has a carpenter's shed, has all kinds of storage, which other community groups also use for storage, by the way. So it's not just town stuff in that building. And see what's available for funding per se to relocate that blue building off of Star Street somewheres. I personally felt for years, I mean, that blue building was never built for a public works building. It was never built for a carpentry shed. It was actually, those of us that have lived here a long time know better as Bev's Barn. It was built for the fisheries exhibition. So, I mean, that's not the prime location, in my opinion, anyways, for a public works type of building to the entrance of town. Off of Star Street somewheres would be much more appropriate of a location, in my opinion. So I think this is an opportunity for us to go back to the province. I know time is of the essence, so I get that. But I mean, we don't have the perfect spot for you, unfortunately. So reading through everything, I felt that that was the one area that we go back to the province and we could possibly make it better for not only the daycare, because I personally feel that location is the right location for the daycare. I'm not saying the blue building per se, but that recreational complex, the dorm type complex, that is really where the daycare, in my opinion, should be. And out of the options that I've seen, I don't like the community center option, because then we don't have a community center for 2 years during the build for sure. And that's a much bigger, if we're going to do a community build on a community center with the daycare, that's a much bigger project than relocating a storage shed financially. I don't like the track soccer field or whatever it is now, cricket field, ball field idea at all, because I think it cuts into the parking lot, and that is right on the floodplain. I mean, we have pictures of people kayaking there. So I feel in the floodplain area of all the areas, the blue building from the designs I've seen, and I know they were just done quickly, but it's a small corner of the building that actually sits into the floodplain that I'm sure engineers, both with the town and the project, will be able to come up with some solution to mitigate that, or they're not going to build a $10 million building, in my opinion, there if they think it's going to flood, right? So I do give them some credit there. So I think that is the area that we should be focusing on. I don't know where else. I mean, we're at the point now, it's no sense wasting the daycare's time or staff's time coming back with things that just aren't going to work, or potential sites that aren't going to work. So we're down to the crunch, in my opinion. And from what I'm hearing around this table and from the daycare, with what I know about our servicing requirements and our servicing deficiencies currently, both electrical and wastewater, it almost has to go on a site that currently has electricity and wastewater, which the blue building has. To build a brand new facility, say off Star Street, even somewheres at this point, whether it's costly or not to get services to it, do we have the electrical capacity to even to electrify it, for example? We don't know that. So that is where I'm looking. So if we could do sort of like the deputy mayor has suggested, ask staff to come back with a numbers. I mean, we're just talking round figures. At this point, we're not talking any numbers. We have no idea what it's going to cost to move or relocate public works. But I think that's very important. We can't take that lightly either. It's very important to make sure we have a plan B for the public works facility, right? But we need to know numbers to make an informed and educated decision, I think. And then we have to move on, because they've been waiting since May, and it's not the 6 other people sitting around this table's fault. They only got this information in early December, late November, quite frankly, but they have been waiting for a response from us now since May, and it's time we either, make a decision. And no might be an answer down the road once we get all the numbers back, right? That's the crude or fact of the reality of what we are dealing with in Lunenburg right now with our infrastructure and with our available land, right? It's not as simple as it was, say, for example, for our neighbors, because we don't have a parcel of land that's serviced, that's sitting there vacant. that we could give them that's easily done, because trust me, from what I'm hearing, we would do that tonight. You have, you know, the saying you'd have the keys to the building tonight before you left if we had that available, but we don't. So I think we need staff to come back with some numbers as soon as they can for us to make a decision on the 14th to either proceed further in discussions with the daycare and the province, because we're probably going to be looking for some help, or not. And that's my opinion. I don't know if my colleagues agree with me or not, but I mean, the rubber's hit the road now. So we can prolong this for the next 6 months if we want to beg the province for extensions. But if we're going to come back with the same answers, it's no sense doing it, right? So that's my 2 cents worth. Councillor Fullerton.
And if I could add to that, both the mayor's comments and the deputy mayor's comments, I think that we are all in agreement that we want to make this happen as much as possible. And I think if we focus on, as the mayor said, in that recreational complex, the blue building being the best of the choices for a facility. Now what we need to do is find the best of the other options for public works storage. And that narrows it down a little bit. And in order to monetize that, in order to understand what that looks like, you know, that may be a shorter list for staff to focus on to get that information to us.
Agreed. And I mean, no matter where we go, it's going to be increased traffic. It's going to bring up some dangers for the children, but the daycare is pretty, you know, I think that's going to be fine if it goes in that stretch. Yes, there'll be a delay to get to certain areas, and that'll probably be something we're going to have to look at down the road in that area anyways. But as we've seen with our neighbors, and just go to HRM, with any development or any growth comes growing pains, but there's always short-term pain in any project for long-term gain. And I certainly feel a 250-seat daycare for the children of this community is a benefit that I'd be willing to roll the dice on and see what happens after it's built, quite frankly. So, you know, I don't have a magic ball where it's going to go or how it's going to go in that location, but I think that's where we have very competent staff to come back with some numbers so we can make a decision, you know, in a week's time. So, you know, unfortunately, and I would hate to ask the daycare this, because we've asked them this multiple times. Is there any chance in heck that the province, considering Christmas, the election and everything else, that they would extend this deadline even until the end of the month? Because 7 days, technically the way we have our policy, if there's a report that gets presented on Tuesday night that we have to make a decision on, you know, we're supposed to have that in our hands by Thursday or Friday. So that's tomorrow. It's by tomorrow, right? So that's probably not going to happen if we want real numbers and real figures. So is there any chance, do you know, of an extension?
Through the chair. While I appreciate the amount of faith that council has in staff being able to whip up estimates, I do just want to caution that as we have seen through other assessments and pricing projects recently, those types of things do take time. They do often take external expertise. Doing a study such as this is not included in our current budget. So while I recognize that there is a desire for fixed, reliable information, the likelihood that we would be able to accurately price how much a new public works building would cost, including the servicing costs, is unlikely. We may be able to get you some figures. However, they should be taken with a significant, very large pinch of salt. You know, again, so many factors go into the price of something like that. So again, the certainty of information that you're seeking may not be something that we can deliver unless council would like to put aside time and funding to do a comprehensive study of some kind. But it does seem that the timeline also doesn't necessarily allow for that.
What I'm asking for is senior staff to sit down and put some numbers down, rough guesses. I'm not talking exact. I mean, we pay consultants hundreds of thousands of dollars and they come back with numbers that are off by $1 million. So, you know, like we're not going to hold you to a number if you come back with it. We don't when consultants come back at half the cost of what something eventually costs. So we end up going to tender. So again, I think we're just looking for numbers that we can work with that you think are, you know, going to be in the ballpark. I don't think anyone's going to hold you to exact numbers of all of a sudden you say a public works building is going to cost 700,000 and it comes back $1 million, for example. And I'm just throwing them out there, but you know.
The other part of it is even, you know, the dollars and cents are important, of course, very important. But the other part of it is just how if it could work, what it would look like. So, is it, you know, there's a scenario of erection of just a storage shed that doesn't need services, basically, to look after the storage part, and like where the salt dome is or whatever, and then temporarily perhaps relocating the carpentry shop to another town-owned building, for example. Is that an option? For example, those are the kinds of things, because I'm not comfortable giving a go-ahead on a site when we don't have sort of a plan, an alternative plan for what is happening there now. And, you know, I don't think we're best placed to dictate, you know, that this should happen and this is how it should happen. So I'm just looking to see if, even in this compressed time frame, if staff can offer some options, or some ideas or potential plans for our town use of that site elsewhere. And then there, you know, there's tons of work that would have to be done in actually making that happen. And not to mention the costs. I mean, there's the inconvenience is a polite word. I mean, it's going to be a big impact on the staff in the short term to accommodate that anyway. So I guess I'm just kind of wanting a better sense of what that might look like. And only staff can tell us that, I think.
Yeah, along the lines of what the deputy mayor said as well. Like, I mean, for example, even if you look between now and Tuesday night, because obviously this is going to be a report that we're going to have to add to the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, because we're not going to have it by tomorrow. Okay. So if we want to talk about this Tuesday night, it's going to have to be an item that we agree to add at the beginning of Tuesday night's meeting, which, you know, is obvious. And we can do that. That's within our rights. But again, for example, I'm looking straight ahead and I have no idea. All I hear is how bad it is and how terrible it is. But I mean, there's a huge building behind us that, you know, for 16 years, I was in the fire department. That's where the fire truck set. And it's got a lot of space in the Bay Area, especially, or I thought it did. I haven't been in a while. Maybe you could move the carpentry shed. I don't know, but maybe that's an area that you could use, right? Current facilities to move some of the stuff that needs heat and electricity currently. And then the storage shed. I mean, a storage shed wouldn't be near as expensive to build if it's just a straight metal storage shed, right? So again, is everybody in agreement to send this back to staff to come back with some more definitive numbers and answers by Tuesday night?
And review the parking study that we just paid so much money for in light of this being like the largest parking lot in the town.
Yeah, I think that might be ready for the 14th agenda. Any chance? Okay.
All I can say is that we'll certainly try our best And Mark and I were aware that it would be a very quick turnaround. So we will try our best to get you additional information. My list includes, again, perhaps some more information on the land owned around the Harborview Haven site. Again, and more details on potentially moving Public Works to the Blue Building, and anything that could be gleaned from the draft parking study. So we will certainly do our best to see what we can do in a very short period of time. But again, I would just say to, again, treat that information with some skepticism.
Well, I just have an email saying that something that I was going to be participating on in the weekend is canceled. So if you need help, I'm available.
Okay, so everybody's in favor, then we just do a friendly, we don't need a motion, do we? Or what are we going to do? No one gave that motion. We can give the motion if you'd like. You give the motion if you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll make the motion that Committee of the Whole direct staff to prepare a report for Council's January 14th, 2025 meeting, incorporating the committee's direction on the Lunenburg Daycare Center's request for town-owned land and potential partnership opportunities, including preferred site options, which would be, in this case, the Blue Building, I think. Cool.
That's been moved by Councillor Babin. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Fullerton. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried unanimous. What I'm going to do quickly is call a quick 5-minute recess so the people from the daycare can go home and enjoy their evening and maybe some. Okay. Thank you very much, by the way, for showing up tonight and being willing to take some questions on the spot. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. And before we go any further, we had some comments from the gallery on the comments that were being made during the last session, and not about what was being made, about if every counselor or most counselors could try to move their mic a bit closer. It's really hard to hear us speak. They don't have any problem hearing me. That's unfortunate, but anyway, so if you can move your mic closer, that would help. So we're going to move on to 8.1. 8 through 8.6 is really the same sort of thing. So we're going to get the CAO to give a quick update on that, and then we can have discussions on, because it's sort of all intertwining. So we'll talk about it at that point. Hillary?
Thank you so much and good evening. I'm going to quickly present on the Housing Accelerator Fund. We're bringing these initiatives forward as a package so Council can consider the initiatives holistically and advise us on any next steps before we return to the regular Council table. The Housing Accelerator Fund is unique in that funding is not for specific projects like individual building projects, but for high-level policy and program initiatives aimed at creating a planning ecosystem supportive of housing. The money can be spent on housing initiatives, as well as housing infrastructure and community infrastructure that supports housing. The town has received $1.1 million in support of the 6 high-level initiatives. If 135 housing units are permitted by January 31st, 2027, we will receive the full funding amount. If we fall short of the 135 units, we will not receive the final grant payment, which is $289,735.75. $32,500 from the Housing Accelerator Fund is being spent on infrastructure modeling towards meeting our initiative milestones. But this is the only expense that should be incurred in completing these initiatives. Thus, even if the town does not reach its housing target of 135 housing units, the town will be left with $836,707.25. to seed the grant programs that have been proposed as initiatives, and to spend it on community infrastructure and infrastructure in support of housing. If we do not complete an initiative or we miss a milestone, we can lose all of the funding. This is why staff have been reluctant to spend any of this money until all the milestones are met and the initiatives are complete. So there is little to no chance of the municipality being caught having to repay funds that it has already spent. CMHC appears lenient with administrative delays at the staff level, but has enforced penalties for council level inaction, like voting down an initiative. All these initiatives were approved by council before the town applied for the funding. As you can see, we are on target to reach all of our milestones. I can answer any questions on the HAF program, and I then recommend that you discuss the initiatives. Any direction that is provided, staff will incorporate into these initiatives, again, before they return to the regular council table.
Thank you. So it's open to the floor. Questions?
I'll sit
for-
close to my mic. What are the restrictions in terms of housing? Is this at all? This is to accelerate housing? Is there a financial restriction on what kind of housing is to be built with it, or?
No, there is not.
So I read under discussion that we can spend it on a number of things, as well as housing infrastructure and community infrastructure that supports housing. So how come we can't spend that on upgrades to the electricity grid or to the, is there an answer I'm not sure of? Maybe explain that.
Yeah, through the chair. While I would want to do some digging into whether whether this money can be transferred to the utility, certainly it can be spent on infrastructure upgrades. That is an eligible expense. Community assets in support of housing includes things such as parks, trails, anything that supports housing growth or desirability.
Deputy Mayor?
So I'm just looking for clarity in my head, trying to understand this. So the previous council with staff put together the proposal, which included these 6 initiatives intended to encourage housing development. And we received, the town of Lunenburg received the grant, was successful in securing the grant. But unless all 6 of these initiatives are done, we may have to, if we do 5 but not the 6th, or if we do 4 and not the other 2, then we may have to refund the money we've already received and not get any more.
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess I think housing development is important. And there's some real these are new ideas that could produce some incentive and be helpful in encouraging housing development. I know affordable housing is still needed in the community for sure. I guess my concern is that we've identified infrastructure challenges that currently exist. So I'm wondering about the contradiction between encouraging development and having challenges to actually realizing the possibility of that development.
The way I understand it, and I've had to read this a few times because this was a program that they applied for before I was there, and it's not like your traditional programs where you get funding for a certain project or a project-based funding and you spend it on that project and away you go. It's more of a a funding to encourage the possibility or to make development possible or easier. So the one answer I had today when we met this afternoon was the fact that I was scared that if we did, say, 5 of the 6 initiatives, but we didn't hit our target of 135 units by January 2027, which is hard to believe, it seems so far away, but it's 2 years from now, they'd take our money back. And I guess that's not the case. We don't get our last payment, which is nice to know. So then we at least have still about $800,000 to put into capital infrastructure or however we see fit. I mean, the one part of this that I know that we have to do all 6 and we have to come up with ideas, and that's great. The part that I like is the fact that we can actually take this money and put it towards some of the infrastructure needs that we need in certain areas of town to make development possible. We all know there's areas that, like, water and sewer just stop, or electrical just stop, and there's more land beyond that we might be able to, take some of this money and increase the services in those areas. So I do like that. The only part going down through this, and there's 4 or 5 components here, is the one about the tax incentives and housing incentives and the tax breaks to incentivize development. That's the one part that if we do we go that route, and we have to, because that's what we said we were going to do. If we continue on in this, it's hard to incentivize development if development can't actually happen in that area at the time, right? So I think as long as we get our core infrastructure in place, and at least have a plan to have it, fixed in the next 2 to 3 years, and then I think this is a great program. Unfortunately, it's like a lot of the, quite frankly, federal programs that came out in the last couple of years when it comes to housing. They put housing, but they didn't do anything to any of the municipalities to fix the infrastructure that would allow more housing in most of these communities. So I think it's sort of a catch-22, and it's easy to say you need more housing and higher tax base to fix your core infrastructure, but you can't do that reverse. You have to have your core infrastructure to be able to handle more housing first, right? So I like a lot of this. I like the fact that we haven't spent any of it. I like the fact that they can't take it all back if we don't get to the 135 units. So after reading this, I personally don't see a negative in proceeding at this point with the recommendations the way they're presented, in my opinion. And then, in 2 years or a year from now, if we decide we're just going off the rails, or 6 months, then so far we haven't spent any, or if the infrastructure improvements or upgrades aren't going the way we have hoped, then we might have to claw back a bit on promoting development. But again, I'm all for development, and I want to see development, and I think these are ways to help incentivize development. But I'm also a realist, and I realize that if you can't supply electricity to development, you're not going to live with candles in 2025, right? So again, it's sort of putting the cart before the horse in some cases.
Some people may not see me as the eternal optimist, but the last paragraph on that page points out that if we're thrifty and we follow the program like we have been, and thanks staff for helping us on that path, and the former council, we could be, my favorite term, a strong candidate for bonus funds.
Oh, staff has been very adamant and very on point with this project. I will say that. And I know it was driven by the previous council, and this is one of their strong pushes. And so I do commend staff for pushing forward, especially over the last maybe 6 or 8 months when other things have sort of paused. They kept working internally and getting these things ready to roll. So again, I thank staff, and I thank staff for not going out and spending the first payment we got just to spend it, right? To hold it and to see how we go. But again, in true Lunenburg fashion, I think that if we decide 6 months from now this isn't a route we can continue on at this time, we will have the money to give back if we have to give it back. But I don't see any negatives in proceeding in this fashion at this time. It's just my personal opinion. Councilor Babineau?
Yeah, so I would also agree. I take a look at these initiatives, and I have no issues with any of them really, but I'm just wondering if tonight staff was also maybe looking for a little bit of clarity surrounding like some of the metrics being used and things like that. So we should probably maybe have a bit of a chat about that too.
Yeah, well, 8.1, there's just no recommendations for information.
Yeah.
So then as we move down, yeah, there are recommendations there that if we all agree to, someone will make and we'll move forward.
Okay.
But the one thing that I noticed in some of them, and I don't know which one it is, I have notes here, I have to, but the one thing I like that staff came back with is all we keep hearing is the CHMC threshold for affordable housing nationally goes by your median income of the community, which is $1,684 per month. So what the report is not, they're not recommending, what they're suggesting is another way to go is 30% of the median income of renters within the community, which actually brings the monthly amount down to $1,015. Now, being a true Lunenburger, $1,015 a month rent seems high, but it seems much more reasonable than 1,600 and some. And obviously, I'm not a developer, and there are some here tonight, but I would think that in order to get $1,000 a month renter down to that number, you would definitely have to have some incentivized things in place for that to happen. So again, I like the overall just of the reports, and I like some of the recommendations they're making, because that's the one thing we all read on social media and everywhere else when the affordable housing came up as 30% of the median income was $1,600 and some dollars. I think that that sort of blew everybody's mind at that time from Lunenburg. So I think this is more reasonable, the other amount.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I mean, it seems like that's a question for several of these as well. I always have an issue though with that 1,600, the 30%, because it doesn't indicate like what type of rental unit you're talking about. So is that 1,600 for a 3-bedroom, or is that 1,600 for a studio? Because like there's a big difference there. So is it a 1-bedroom? I've never seen that actually specified out in anything that I've read, like online, any articles. So, but there's a big difference, right, between a studio and a 3-bedroom.
So 8.1 is for information only. So there's no recommendations. So do you want to move on to 8.2? The affordable housing tax forgiveness one? Okay, so Hillary?
Thank you so much. In 2024, the Municipal Government Act was amended to empower municipalities to offer targeted tax incentives to those constructing affordable housing. One of the town's HALF initiatives is a 3-year municipal tax break towards increasing affordable housing. Staff would appreciate feedback on how affordability should be defined and the program's scope and direction, whether there are must-haves for an application and compliance process.
Thank you. So anyone have any questions this time for Hillary? There is a recommendation there, but we can do some questions first if you'd like. Councillor Daphne.
The affordability criteria definition. Never good at math, never was. Mr. Garg would tell you that, Jamie, Mr. Mayor. However, I did some quick calculations, and on my salary as a landscaper, which you can pretty much guess what it is, even the $1,000 threshold would be a push. Now, I have a very special relationship with my landlord, so I could probably make it work, except for the winter, when I would probably have to go sit in my car to get warm, because we all know the price of the oil. I think that the town should take that into consideration. I'm thinking of my group of friends. Yes, I do have a few that are in the teaching profession, but I also have many friends in the landscaping world, in the retail world. And I have friends that are single parents, and $1,000 is still quite a chunk for them. So I'm all for the town establishing its own thresholds for affordability. The other thing I'm having a problem with is the 3-year tax thing, forgoing the tax for 3 years. It just doesn't sit well with me. And I'm looking for other feedback from other counselors and the mayor too about that. My spidey sense is up when I read that. So that's it.
I think the tax forgiveness, the way I read it, was put in there because that's one way to give the developer an opportunity to offer rent cheaper than what the market rate or the affordable rate might be. So like, obviously, if you build a 20-unit apartment building, I have no idea what the taxes would be, but they'd be significant. So by giving them a 3-year break on a new build, especially, it's something that we're not losing anything at that point because we didn't have it before. And it's a way to increase the affordability, I guess, of those looking to rent. So that's the way I understood it, as I'm also not, if it's a for-profit based developer, I'm not, a big tax forgiveness kind of guy, because we just don't do that for-profit based businesses anyways. But again, if it's to help increase the housing prices and get people in places that they normally wouldn't be able to afford, that's the way I would look at it. And the other thing is I liked about the recommendation on a lot of these is pilot project, the word pilot project. So this, I would be definitely in favor of trying as a pilot project and just seeing how it works out for the first 3-year pilot project, and to see if people, there are a lot of criteria that they have to meet within that 3 years. And if everybody's meeting it and it's doing what we thought it was going to do, then maybe it's a great thing. And if not, we might say, we don't want to do that again, and take it off the table. But that's how I was reading it. It's one of the only ways, quite frankly, from what I can hear, from the cost of build right now, it's one of the only things that we have to offer, because we don't have the money the province or the feds do. So without subsidized housing, I don't know how else you can get that price down low enough to what people actually want without some type of tax forgiveness to the developer. That's the way I was looking at it, but I could be wrong.
You're asking for my feedback. So does the rent only then go up in accordance with whatever residential tenancies is allowed for that 1 year? Or if someone moves out, can the landlord increase the rent to above market value or whatever, like for that 3-year period? Does it hold them to any standard with respect to the tenants?
Through the chair, this is exactly the type of thing that I would look for council's direction on.
To me, you'd attach it to a unit. You wouldn't attach it to the tenant. So you'd attach it to, so if the developer says, I'm going to build 20 units and 5 of them are going to be that affordable threshold, which would meet our criteria. Well, 20 units, so you'd have to have 6 of them, 30%. So 6 of them meet the criteria, then it's those 6 units. So whether Johnny moves out or not, and Joey moves in, they can't raise, it has to be someone that's what they have to charge. I would think you'd attach it to the unit would be probably the easiest way to enforce it, but I don't know that for sure. Councillor Fullerton.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that it's about, if you're going to subscribe to this program to get the tax incentive, then there has to be a reporting somehow that comes back to the town, so that the town knows you're living to your end of the bargain as a developer. And the other thing I think that comes into it, that's all part of this equation, or part of these policies that need to be written, are the program scope and duration, which is the second item on that list. And, the first question that's raised is, should the program be limited to new buildings in Lunenburg? Absolutely. I don't think it should. I think that anybody who wants to build a unit and call it an affordable housing unit and live to the reporting and all the rest of the criteria should be entitled to take advantage of that tax incentive.
Anyone else? Councilor Greek?
One last thing that I'd be curious to know if this is something that we decide to move forward with is it states that after 3 years, the town could anticipate benefiting from the expanded tax base. I'd be curious to know how much we could benefit and, you know, how much per unit or per number of units we could be able to expand our tax break or basis by.
I'd love to know that number, but I think it would be hard to quantify before we know how many's actually applied and received it. So if it was like 20 units, it would be X per unit. If it's 15, based on the units, right? But I know it would be interesting to see what we would gain in it, but it would definitely be a win for us after 3 years. And the reason I also like the pilot project idea for 3 years is because the funding at this point is ends after 3 years. So
Yeah, I suppose just to follow up on that, you know, I'm not sure. I'm not saying that we should, you know, base it on, okay, this is just gonna be exactly 74 units and that's what we want to base it off of. But I was just, I guess, wondering if there was a way to say, you know, if there's 10 to 20 units that benefit, if there's a number that we could estimate, or, you know, 50 to 70, that sort of thing.
Councilor Strong?
And have we looked at other jurisdictions to see how this is played out? I would think that this would add an extra administrative duty to town hall. I believe that the town of Truro, for example, may have registered documents with the residential tenancy board under this kind of a program, which bypasses the town. We don't have to administer it. That's for the rental part of it.
Anyone else? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out that as it's mentioned, that this is a newly acquired power that a municipality has been granted through the MGA. So tax forgiveness is not something that's, you know, been done. So to the point of, you know, have other municipal units in the province taken up on this, and what does their criteria look like? It would be really helpful to know if there are templates out there that we could look at. Because, you know, I think that's to the point of Councillor Daphne made. This isn't something that, you know, it is a little, you know, a template step into something new for municipal units. And there was a reason it wasn't allowed up until now, you know, because it can be problematic. So I definitely limited time offer would, I think, be an important condition to put in a policy we'd create.
Anything else? So now I'll ask the question to staff. If someone were to make the recommendation that's in front of us, does staff have enough information after this discussion to come back with a more detailed report at a future meeting, as this has to be passed by the end of February? So, are you good? Okay, so if someone's prepared to move the recommendation in front of us, we can move on to the next. Moved by Councillor Strong, is there a seconder? Councillor Babineau? Any further discussion or question? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, raise your left. Motion carried unanimous. Now we'll move on to 8.3, amendment allowing development agreements for town lands. Hillary?
Thank you so much. At Council's July 13th, 2024 meeting, staff were directed to investigate amending the town's municipal planning strategy to allow for development agreements on lands purchased from the town to meet its Housing Accelerator Fund commitments and address the need for enforceable rules on any potential purchaser of the lower slopes of Blockhouse Hill, again as part of that design evaluation process. These amendments have been endorsed by the town's Planning Advisory Committee and thus procedurally are ready for council review. However, we wanted to bring them here as, again, part of the larger suite of HAF initiatives and to give council an opportunity to discuss them.
Thank you. Councillor Strong?
May as well just be first to pass the post. I just want to clarify that this actually started before July 13th. I think it was Mayor Myra suggested that we enter into development agreements to prevent Airbnbs in the town, on town-owned land, because we really don't want to be promoting the Airbnb concept in public lands that we divest. And then I remember attending the planning committee. And I thought, I'm out of it here, because I thought that they were saying for the entire town that we need to have to re-implement what we had before, which was development agreements for the entire town that left the building in 2021 or something, when we changed the land use map. Is that when it changed?
Through the chair, there are specific instances in which development agreements are still allowed in the town of Lunenburg, but certainly there were changes made in the most recent land use bylaw surrounding development agreements. Some on the Planning Advisory Committee did recommend that council consider allowing development agreements throughout the town of Lunenburg.
Deputy Mayor?
I see that the deadline for this is a bit longer. So this is August, and presumably that's to allow for the process of public hearings and so on that may be required. And to that point, similarly, I going through the process of amendments to the municipal planning strategy to allow development agreements just for town-owned lands, I'm wondering out loud about the benefits of allowing development agreements, period, and looking at some other amendments to the municipal planning strategy along the line during the same time frame, using the same processes, which are important to have that public input. I think this is one area where there was saw the benefit of making an amendment and going through the process, but I think there are probably other spots, some which were identified at the PAC, like parking requirements and potential for development agreements throughout the town, as opposed to just in on what would be divested of public property. So I'm not opposed to this. I'm just wondering if, looking at the longer timeline, if maybe the report could include what that time frame looks like in going through the public process of amending the municipal planning strategy, and the merit of including other potential amendments in that same process.
Thank you. Anybody else? So I just, along those lines, I tend to agree with my colleagues that this should be more broad in spectrum. And I think it's great. I think it was brought to our attention because of the lower portion of Blockhouse Hill was declared surplus. So before any development went on there or anything happened, we wanted strict development rules in place. But again, I think that this is something that we should be looking at in other areas of town as well. We want to be able to prevent what has happened in the recent years in certain areas of town with parking and other things that's gone on. So I think that I think this is something that staff should look at, putting into a much broader policy. And I think I've said this before, and I think our MPS and LUB that was changed in 2021 certainly has to be reviewed, and there has to be some things, like anything, that when it's changed sometimes for the right reasons, you find out 24 months later or 2 or 3 years later that maybe all the reasons weren't the right reasons, and you want to change some things back or at least tweak some of the changes. I think one of the biggest changes that were made in 2021, in my honest opinion, was the zero parking requirements throughout the community. I think in a town in rural Nova Scotia that gets snow, to have zero parking requirements, off-street parking requirements for development is bizarre to say the least. So I think that's something we need to review quickly. I also think that, you know, I've asked before, and I know it's the staff are working on it, but I think that we have to look at our short-term rental policy. And by I mean short-term rentals, I mean non-occupied short-term rentals. I don't mean the traditional B&Bs or whatever. I mean someone owning 7 homes and VRB and owning them for 4 months of the year, nobody living in them for 8. I think that that's something we have to look at. A lot of other communities have certainly done that. It certainly will help with a number of things. It helps your community survive in the winter. It helps your tax base overall, because what it does is it actually, if they're going to be allowed, they should be taxed commercially because they are a business if nobody's living in that house. Once, you know, and that's only my opinion, but seems to be the opinion of a lot of municipal units around us currently, throughout the country. Actually, they're making strict bylaw enforcement against short-term rentals. So I think this is all encompassing about development agreements in place. Then the last thing we want on town-owned land is to go through public hearings and develop a parcel of town-owned land and find out that out of the 20 units put on it, 5 of them are year-round and 15 of them are short-term rentals. That would do nothing for the community but increase the tax base of those other 15 spots, which is very short-term thinking, in my opinion. So that's where I sit on this. I think that we're heading in the right direction, but I think maybe staff coming back with a broader development agreement policy that would pertain to all areas of town, I think would be much more satisfying for me anyways. Anybody else want to? Okay, Councilor Babineau?
I just really wanted to chime in and say that I agree, and I think that development agreements, I love the idea of them kind of giving us a little bit more of a customized approach to this. And I think, to Rachel's point, about maybe sort of incorporating other amendments into that process, maybe streamlining things. I don't see the harm in that either. I think that could be very useful as well. So.
Anybody else? Okay, so once again, I'll go back to my question I had last one. If we've all had our 2 cents worth, does staff have enough information to come back with a more detailed report if we make this recommendation? Okay, is someone prepared to move this recommendation?
Okay, I'm going to recommend that the proposed amendments to the municipal planning strategy as outlined in attachment A to council go to council for consideration, enabling the use of development agreements on lands throughout the town.
It's been moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Fullerton. Any further discussion, question on the motion? Does staff have everything they need? Okay, all in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, motion carried unanimous. Now we move on to 8.4, Affordable Housing Grant Program Policy. Hillary?
Thank you so much. In addition to tax breaks, staff have been working on an affordable housing grant program. With council's feedback, staff will develop a comprehensive draft policy, including a detailed evaluation framework, funding agreement template, and administrative procedure. The refined proposal will be presented to council for formal approval.
Thank you. Who wants to start this time? Deputy Mayor? Okay.
I just got a really quick question. I was trying to figure out the timelines for each of these, and I thought this was a later timeline, but is it February 2025 then for this particular one too?
Through the chair, an internal report needs to be completed for that time. So we need to have evidence that staff have done some research towards developing this program. But then the deadline for a council motion is February 28th, 2026. Of course, again, staff recommend that until every initiative is complete, we do not disperse any funds. So thus, if anyone wanted to, for example, apply for funding under the Sustainable Infrastructure Fund, it would not make sense to disperse funds through that that are related to the HAF fund without all the initiatives being complete, because again, you risk spending funds that you may then have to pay back to the federal government. Or CMHC, I should say.
So I guess in the recommendations asking for a draft grant program. And I'm thinking of staff time, frankly, with this, just, you know, with everything coming, looking like we're asking for a lot as far as draft policies are concerned. If this one is not as urgent, I'm just wondering if it shouldn't be put off just in the interests of meeting the deadlines, but not overburdening staff when we have lots of other things going on. So that's the reason I brought up the timeline of February 26 as the deadline for this, and whatever preliminary research work has to be done towards that to meet the deadline of February 2025, you know, perhaps we could move ahead with without looking for the more fulsome policy at this point.
Agreed. Any other comments? Any other comments on this one?
I think I would agree with Rachel that what I see here in the staff report is it's a pretty good evaluation criteria. So in terms of developing a policy, they've already got a pretty good head start. I don't see it as a rush.
I agree. So I'll guess I'll ask staff, do you have enough to submit by February 25th or 28th, 25 to get us our next round?
Certainly, we're very close. Again, it's good to have something somewhat written up so that we can send it to the funder as sort of physical proof that something has happened. But again, certainly we're well on our way to meet all these milestones.
Excellent, because I mean, most of the criteria that I read, I mean, they all make sense to me, and you know, some of the highlights for me was 1 and 3. 1, we have to the criteria definition was like Councillor Daphne brought up. There were 2 options put on the table. Maybe we have our own criteria that we come up with. I'm not sure what that would be, but you know, it's something the staff could look at. And I think number 3 is very important. Experience by the developer that's applying for that. You know, that grant is very important, I think, to this community. You check with other communities, neighboring communities, their history, or if you have history with them in this community, for example, and that might have might play in their ability to be awarded the grant or not, right? So no, I like it. So if we can move on at this point, I'll get someone to move that recommendation, and we'll keep going. So someone prepared to move it.
I will.
Good, Councilor Boulder.
Okay, so the recommendation, and this is 8.4, that the committee of the whole directs staff to prepare a draft policy for an affordable housing grant program for council's consideration.
Moved. Is there a seconder? Cape and second it. Any further discussion or motion? Seconded by Councilor Strong.
Yeah, just before we, before the vote, I guess just, are there, I guess, are councillors comfortable with the, I'm not sure that we've answered all the questions, like there are a number of criteria, things that were listed. And is more input in our discussion tonight needed to come up with a draft policy?
Through the chair, certainly if there's additional input that you would like to share, of course, we always welcome it. Hearing no strong objections, we can certainly continue to move forward. Again, this is simply an initial committee of the whole meeting. All of these things are going to come forward again for more consideration, more public consideration. So on a official council agenda, a regular council meeting. So, you know, certainly we will continue moving forward with these initiatives to make sure that we don't miss any milestones.
Okay, sounds great. There's a motion on the floor. The only comment I'd make is the one question we did hear, you know, from Councillor Daphne was, you know, even the 30% of renters median income seems high. when you make your final or the next draft, I'll put it that way, is there any way to look into some other neighboring communities or somewheres with some other examples of maybe a third option we might be able to choose? I have no idea what that may be, but if we could get staff to come up with a third option, that would be great.
I would draw from any information we can get from Shack if that's possible.
Sounds great. Not sure what Shack is, but that's good to me. So, okay. There's a motion on the floor, moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed. Awesome. So we'll move on to 8.5, accessible housing incentive policy. Hillary?
Thank you again. Another half initiative is waiving hookup and subdivision fees, which range from approximately $3,500 to $8,500 per dwelling unit. This is to encourage developers to include more accessible dwelling units in their projects. In conversation with the South Shore's Intermunicipal Accessibility Coordinator, staff recommend using the criteria for accessible dwelling units found in the Nova Scotia Building Code regulations. These regulations are up to date and developed through consultation, and they're already familiar to developers and builders. Administratively, this will save staff substantial work developing and administering new guidelines. This policy could also be implemented through the town's existing permitting process.
Thank you. Anyone want to start here? Anyone have any questions? This one's pretty, Councillor Fullerton.
For this one, I was especially interested in whether this is focused strictly on new build or if it would include modifying existing housing units to be accessible housing units. And I thought there was something, but I wanted to get clarification.
Through the chair, excellent question. Currently, as proposed, it is only for new dwelling units versus doing upgrades to existing dwelling units. Again, because the impetus for the Housing Accelerator Fund is to accelerate the construction of new housing units, staff felt that that was more in the spirit of the initial grant. Certainly, we can explore other options. It's at council's discretion. Also, service hookup fees and subdivision fees tend to apply more regularly to new builds because it's unlikely that you would be doing an additional subdivision on a property that already exists. There are always exceptions to every rule, but perhaps less, maybe less of an incentive for a retrofit.
And how I arrived at that question was that, you know, there has been a lot of, or at least I've read in different jurisdictions, there's been quite a bit of money offered for people who want to build a secondary suite on an existing property. And I was just curious about that particular situation with this program.
Through the chair, a new accessory dwelling on a lot would count as an additional housing unit. So in that case, they would be eligible for this program.
Anybody else? Councillor Strong?
Is this encouraging multi-units? I mean, I think there's more bang for the buck, I think, in my mind. If it's a multiple unit that many seniors who are no longer able to function in their homes as easily as they did maybe 20 years before, like me. That's the kind of thing that we're really trying to encourage, I think. So it's multiple, not. Can we write this in that it's multiple? Because I'd hate to see everybody just build an accessory unit in their backyard. And
again, certainly it's up to council what they would and would not like to see this apply to.
Accessory units, from my understanding, there is provincial funding available for the homeowner to build in their backyard. So I'm just sort of thinking it's double dipping. And I'd like to see it be 1% of 4 or something. If somebody's building a 4-plex, one unit meets the accessibility criteria. because then we're sort of doing two things at once.
Anybody else? Councilor Greek.
Thinking this could also be an opportunity to, have this this program as kind of a pilot, being able to look at it for a number of years, seeing how effective it is, seeing how much opportunity developers and folks that are building new units are able to take up on it, especially considering some of the admin considerations and just some of the overall interest to be able to gauge whether it's something we want to go forward with or if it's not suiting its purpose or its need.
Yeah, I had notes made. I love the pilot project idea because you can always tweak it or get rid of it or improve it or whatever. The other comment I was just going to make is that going door to door, 7 of the last 18 months, you certainly realize that accessibility type of rented properties are going to be more and more in the need for the town of Lunenburg. We have a lot of people that are on that verge in the next 10 years, especially of wanting to probably stay in Lunenburg, but they're going to have to downsize, move out of their home or whatever into a new rental unit, and being accessible is is going to be very important in my opinion moving forward. That's probably going to be our largest population of people looking for rent over the next 10 years will be the older population that currently live here and do not want to move out of the community, but want to, downsize and stay within the town of Lunenburg. So I really like the idea of this policy. And I think that it's going to be very important for us, hopefully, to encourage more accessible builds moving forward. I mean, there are a lot of stuff already in the building code that you have to put in builds now, but I think making it fully accessible is definitely, something that is very important to this community. Councilor Babineau.
I just wanted to mention or just touch base on the compliance verification sort of piece of this about, documentation being provided by the developers to make sure obviously that they're doing what they said they were going to do. I like the idea of refunds only being issued after the construction is complete and that they've been certified. So I think it's really easy to slap like a handrail on something and call it accessible when it's not. So.
Just, just being tweaked by the double dipping suggestion. There's, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing. There could be opportunity for developers to take advantage of more than one of these programs with one development, right? So you could do a unit with affordability and get some tax break there, and then also do accessibility units and also get some extra incentives. Okay, just wanted to clarify that that's a possibility.
Through the chair is currently proposed, yes. But again, if that is not something council wants to see, it's only a matter of giving us direction.
I think the idea behind this whole fund when it was applied for was to accelerate growth and development so that it makes sense that you could possibly meet the criteria of 2 or 3 of multiple levels of this within the same build. And that's what you want to see. You want to see more diverse builds. So I think it's great. I never thought of it until you brought it up, but I think it's a great thing. Are you guys okay with Jennifer commenting from the floor? She just put her hand up and asked if you could say anything. Council okay with that? Yep. Go ahead. I had to ask.
Thank you. Right. Jennifer Corson, architect and owner at Solitaire Design. We're an architecture firm based in Halifax with a branch office here in Lunenburg. My first hat is architect, but second hat is a small D developer. As over my 30 years in this field, we've done some development projects independent of the design firm. Our firm is a green, sustainable firm. That's what we have expertise at, and we are currently working on a multi-unit new build plan project in the town of Lunenburg. We are applying to CMHC's Affordable Housing Fund that has 3 criteria. And it's very similar to what you're hearing about tonight, that you meet the requirements for affordability, accessibility, and energy efficiency. You have to meet a threshold in all three of those headings. So there are already a lot of existing guidelines that I, as an applicant, have to meet. So instead of creating new policies, I highly suggest that you look at the existing requirements that I have to meet anyway for that fund to proceed. For example, under accessibility, not only do you have to meet the new building code requirements for accessibility, but there is increased incentive if you meet the Rick-Hansen accessibility fund, which is a new higher level certification project than just a building code. So there's stepped levels of funding or grant that's available for accessibility. Under affordability, this is a super complex one, and I don't even presume to kind of be able to give you the highlights of it. But what Modal requested to the town at your previous meeting to participate in a study about rental rate information being available to CMHC affects our application, affects any application for a developer going after the fund, because to meet the affordability basic threshold is that a developer offers 30% of the units that they're creating at 30% of the median rental income for the region for 20 years. I'll repeat that. If you are building 100 units, and not that we are, let's just use round numbers, 30% of those units, 30 units would have to be offered at 30% of the rental rate that's noted by CMHC for this region for 20 years. So let's say it's $1,000 a unit. I, as a developer, would have to offer that unit for $700 a month for 20 years fixed. That is 30% below that rate. So the issue right now is that the town of Lunenburg and Modal do not have any data in the reference charts that CMHC goes to say that our application needs to use in our a crazy spreadsheet that you can't imagine. So the default is that we have to use Nova Scotia's median rental rate, which is far below the actual rates here. So it's an absolute disincentive to be a developer, not only in the town of Lunenburg, but in the municipality, because that data is not available. So I highly, highly support participating in that study that Modal's working on, so that there's not a dash or not available for the town of Lunenburg in terms of rental information. I know there was a concern about anonymity or public information. I don't believe that's at all an issue, because this is a study that's done in every municipality.
If you could just turn your mic off, all. Is Modal asking, the letter that we received from Modal was kind of vague. But what we saw online, or what I saw online on my own research, I didn't have help from the town on this, was that it's owners of 5 units or more that are being asked to report. Like it seems too vague.
I'm unsure of that. I'm not sure. Mackenzie, actually, who was also your daycare consultant, works with me at Solitaire and has been part of the application. Is it 5 units? I don't believe it has a.
They were gonna do stuff.
Yeah.
If that could be clarified, that would be great.
We'll have
Because-
to go back to Modal, and we'll meet with Modal, or our staff will get a hold of Modal and find out exactly what they're asking for. But I agree, those are numbers that are vitally important to entice development in this area. Mark knows? Awesome.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, oh, sorry, Jennifer. So we do expect to bring that, I believe, at the next council meeting. And we have had some communications and coordination with the folks from Modal, so all those details should be prepared into a report at this next council meeting.
And just, I'm never in favor of recreating things that already exist. And CMHC is the first gate that you have to pass in order to be considered by the province for additional funding. And that it is stacked funding that's available, both in grant and low and no interest loans at extended rates, for extended terms for preferred rates. So the idea of stacking is quite common, and that I would just presume that you might consider having similar threshold requirements rather than create your own in terms of perhaps a percentage of housing. Don't make it 40% when the two other programs are 30% of the units being created being affordable, or a different accessibility requirement than what's already there. It's already complicated enough to kind of jump through the hoops of the two levels, let alone the building code. And what I can only confirm that you've mentioned, Mr. Mayor, is that the cost to build new is already, or is still astronomical, has been for the last number of years. Really, we don't see it coming back down in terms of costs to build per square foot. So any incentive from a application fee, connection fees, tax incentives that you're discussing is one way that a developer might be able to deal with the cost of housing, creating new building, and looking at projects building in the town. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for putting your hand up and coming up and speaking. And then just to, I mean, I think all of us around this table are very strong advocates for development moving into the future. I'm just hopeful that we can get our core infrastructure up to speed so we can actually accommodate what's coming forward, because I'm excited. I haven't seen anything officially yet, but I've heard things on the street about different developments, and I'm very excited what I've heard. And I think that in the next 1 to 4 to 5 years or so, there's some great potential that could possibly happen within the town of Lunenburg. But first, we around this table have to get our core infrastructure, up to date. So thank you very much, Jennifer, for taking time tonight and speaking to us. So with this 8.5, are we okay to move forward with the recommendation at this time, or do we have anything more we'd like to add? Oh, Councillor Daphne, sorry about that.
The housing variety. When you look at accessibility, just using my mom as an example for the last few years of her life, being able to get outside and enjoy the outside is just as important to being able to be accessible inside. Especially, mom had me and I provided entertainment for her, but if you're alone, you want to get outside and you want to interact with your neighbors. So I would love to see an accessible outside area be considered too, for mental health. And as you all know, we're all about the mental health aspect. The other thing I would also like to see, along the lines of the experience of the developer, I'd like to be able, and I know this is a stretch, but I get very angry when I read or go to a place that is supposedly accessible and it's not. So for me, I would feel much more comfortable being able to actually go and see something that the developer has done. I'm not willing to settle for less when it comes to accessibility. And I know I'm very adamant about affordability too, but accessibility. I saw through my mom that
Thank you, Councilor Daphne. Anybody else want to say about this? Are we ready to move with a motion at this time? Okay, so staff, do you have enough information? Okay, so I'm prepared to make a motion. Moved by Councilor Fullerton, seconded by Councilor Babineau. The recommendation that's, okay, go ahead, Councilor.
8.5, the recommendation is that the committee of the whole direct staff to prepare a draft accessible housing incentive policy for council's consideration.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, motion carried unanimous. On to 8.6, Hillary.
Through the chair, this is the last item. So thank you for hanging in there. This program has already received public interest with 3 potential applicants. Staff are seeking feedback on evaluation criteria for dispersing matching grants towards infrastructure extension and improvements in support of housing. Given the interest in this program, you will notice it is more fulsomely developed than others, with some draft documents included in the agenda, because on Council's direction, we have been working to get this program up and running as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have anything on this one? Deputy Mayor?
And sorry, this is just me trying to catch up on what transpired prior to our input. So street services extension policy, a separate standalone policy is new. Is that, am I right in thinking that's a new policy that's been developed for the town, or has this been a long-standing practice?
Through the chair, my understanding is that this is a relatively new policy, 2 years, 2-year-old policy that was again developed to empower cost sharing for infrastructure.
May I ask, so basically then if we pass this and you basically have a draft policy here, and if we pass this as it's written and move forward, if someone would apply through this grant, then I'm assuming that the funding that we would grant or the funding that we would spend to extend it could come out of this Accelerator fund, correct? Okay, so it's really spending government funds that have been promised to us as long as we meet the criteria and they like what we send into them, right? Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Deputy Mayor.
Sorry. But again, just for clarification, the prior to having any of this policy in place, it was the responsibility was on the developer to provide this to provide the infrastructure to the development that they were looking to develop. Is that accurate? Do we know? Yeah. Okay.
Through the chair, I would want to do a little bit of research to understand how these types of files were handled in the past. Again, it is before my tenure. And of course, different types of services have different regulations. So for example, if it's a utility, if it isn't a utility, there's different guidelines based on different things. Generally, we try to bring servicing to the lot line. But again, my understanding is that this policy was originally developed to support developers and to make their projects more financially feasible.
And I guess that's why I was, looking for the change that it's as an incentive to development, which hadn't existed previously. So, and we're just looking to tweaks to that 2-year-old policy at this point. Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? So I will ask once again, staff, do you have enough information to proceed if someone makes this recommendation?
We certainly can. Again, if there is feedback, we'll work to incorporate it. If not, we'll continue down the path that we are and work towards bringing this to a regular council meeting.
Okay, someone prepared to move the recommendation in front of us, 8.6. Okay, moving by Counselor Strong. You want to read it? Yeah, go ahead. Yep. It's been moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Counselor Greek. Any further question, concerns? All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried unanimous. Seeing there's no notice of motion, no closed session, we're soon ready for adjournment, but I want to thank Counselor Daphne tonight for wearing her blue glasses and her blue sweater in honor of the Toronto Maple Leafs playing tonight, because I know she's a big Leafs fan, so thank you.
Are you not going to have council reports? Because I have something really important.
Not tonight. That's not on this agenda.
Baby's birthday coming up on the 10th and Rachel on the 9th.
Okay, excellent.